Hello everyone, welcome back to MixbusTv. David here. Hope you're having a great day. In this video, we talk again, hopefully once and for all, about gain staging, recording levels, and master fader headroom. Let's get to it. Music production and mixing have changed greatly in the past 2 decades. So the concepts and the techniques that we were using when we were fully analog or even on tape are very, very different from what we are using today. Some concepts still apply, but we need to revise the process. And we need to differentiate between 100% in-the-box music production and mixing and when you use a hybrid system. So you start incorporating hardware gear, whether for production or mixing. And another scenario is 100% computer-based music, so you only use loops and samples and maybe you just record vocals, from when you record actual instruments and you use microphones and preamps. Then gain staging is a lot trickier. So let's start with the most common scenario nowadays. You only use loops and samples and you're mixing 100% in the box. If that's you, here's the good news. You don't need to overthink gain staging. The one rule that you have to keep in mind is just don't clip. Don't clip your single tracks, don't clip your groups, don't clip your master fader, and you're good. Because DAWs operate at 32-bit floating point nowadays, it's theoretically impossible to clip the tracks, the groups, and the master fader. The only thing you need to do is to lower the fader. But gain staging is not done with faders. Faders are there for mixing, for automation, for level. Let's take the common scenario. You import in your song 20, 30 loops, and usually loops and samples come already normalized. So each track will peak at 0 dB. Comes without saying that if you import all those tracks and you leave your faders at 0, you're gonna clip your master fader. Actually, all you need is 2 tracks peaking at 0 at the same moment and your master fader will clip. So even in that case, you don't do the gain staging by lowering all your faders. You do gain staging with either a trim plugin, a gain plugin as first slots on your chain. And there are many reasons to do that. The first one, the most important, you don't want to clip your plugins on the way in. So the fader, remember, is post inserts. The fader comes after your inserts, your plugins. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the level going into the first plugin and the following is at the right level. What is the right level? Hard to say. Most plugins that emulate hardware as the hardware itself are calibrated to work at -18 dBSF as a 0. So that should be your ballpark level for each single track. In that way, you're sure that none of your tracks is hitting a plugin too hot and distorting. And if you remember what I said about the fader, you can't use the fader because the fader comes after the plugin. So you're already distorting the plugin and then you're lowering the level because you're clipping your DAWs meter. That's why you're using a gain plugin, a trim plugin as first slots. So the level of that track and all the other tracks is right. And this takes care of the gain staging of single tracks in relationship to the plugins. But what about your tubas? This is where it gets a little bit tricky to give you a number as to what level each individual track should be. If you have a 40 tracks mix, you can get away with a much higher level for individual tracks because your master bus is not gonna clip, as opposed to have a 100 tracks mix. In that case, each individual level will need to be a lot lower for your master bus to have headroom and not to clip. So you have to combine these two things. Each individual level in relationship to the plugins that you use, and then to the groups if you send your tracks to a group, and then the overall gain staging, which is your master fader. And this takes us to at what level my master fader should peak. Well, again, if you're 100% in the box, that's a good news. It doesn't matter. As long as you don't clip, it doesn't matter if your master fader peaks at -1 or -12. It makes no difference. When your mix is done, so you're ready to send your mix to a mastering engineer, it doesn't matter if your highest peak is a -1 or a -12. As long as you don't clip, that's okay. Because let's say it clips a -1 and your master engineer needs more headroom to work, it will just lower it down. That's the beauty of being in 32-bit floating point. Even if you're clipping the output of your master fader and you're 100% in the box, theoretically you can just lower the fader and not clip anymore. But this doesn't take care of the problem that you're probably clipping the sum of all your tracks before the master fader, okay? So by lowering the master fader, you just avoid to see the clipping in your DAW, but you're still clipping the sum when all the tracks combined. So if you're 100% in the box, you only use samples and loops. So if you're 100% in the box, you're using only samples and loops. You don't go in and out of your converters, so you don't use hardware insert in your mixing setup. Because those samples and loops usually comes normalized, you will most likely have to trim the level down. So leave all your faders at 0, put a trim plugin or a gain plugin as a first slot on each track, play the song maybe in a chorus when all the instruments are playing, so you are at the highest level. At that point, trim down the level of each track so that you read about -14, -12 dB on your master fader. Again, when the track is playing, all the instruments open, all faders at 0. And then you reach that -12, -14, -16 on your master fader, trimming the gain down of each track. This way you're sure you're not clipping single tracks, you're not gonna clip groups, you're not clipping your two-bus, and you're not clipping plugins on the way in. And this is also the correct way to set up your master bus compression. This is how we set up our master bus compression or saturator or any processing on the two-bus. You want to make sure that after the processing, you're about the same level that without the processing. So for an objective A-B comparison between processed and not processed, you want these two to be pretty much at the same level. And that's the second reason to shoot for level matching before and after processing, because if you do that for all tracks, you won't have to adjust the two-bus compressor that much as the mix progresses. And it will also make your mixing much easier because we started with faders at 0. You will always have a reference level, which is that unity gain. And if you do that on every mix, you will start to be consistent with your mixes. Okay, so every mix starts at unity. You try to shoot for unity gain before and after processing. You will start to get consistent with your mixes, with your processing. You will start to have reference point for how hard you're gonna hit your two-bus, your saturators. Make sense? I hope so. Now let's talk about the second scenario. You record the real instruments and or you use hardware as inserts, so you go in and out your converters. In this case, you need to be a lot more careful with your gain staging. Let's talk about recording levels first. This is something that changed greatly from when we were using tape, from where we were only using analog to record and track and mix. Back then, gear was noisy, tape was noisy, microphones were noisy. So noise was our enemy, was our first concern. We needed to hit the front end, so tape or even the first converters, at a high level to have the best signal to noise ratio, because noise was pretty high back then, especially compared to nowadays. So we needed to get as much signal as possible, as high as possible, because noise floor was steady. That was the level. If you recorded too low, the signal was this close to the noise. If your signal was this high and far from the noise floor, that was of course a better signal to noise ratio. And this is why back then we were trying to record as hot as possible before clipping. Nowadays, noise is not a problem. It shouldn't be. If you have a noise problem in your recording chain, then you have something wrong in your recording chain, because even cheap microphones and cheap converters and cheap gear are low noise enough for the noise not to be a problem when recording. So you have no benefit anymore recording hot, and it can actually be detrimental to the material. Why? Because most prosumer mid-price converter, they don't have that much headroom. Doesn't matter what they write on the specs, most converters don't perform well when you record close to clipping. They start to sound bad. Again, a ballpark number would be -12, -10 dB. So you're in the green, you're not even in the yellow. Way far from the red, okay? That's a good starting point, because again, noise floor is not a problem, so you don't need to record hot. And why doing it if you run the risk of your converter starting to sound bad? Just don't do it. Stay conservative with levels, okay? This way you probably won't have to do that much trimming at the gain staging when starting the mix. Now that we recorded at the right level, we go into the scenario of mixing hybrid, so with hardware gear, hardware inserts. In this case, gain staging is crucial, again for the same reasons. Most converters say something on the specs, but they actually don't handle 124 dB of headroom at their ADDA stage. And remember, while DAW's internal audio engines operates at 32-bit floating point, we do record at 24-bit. At 60 dB per bit per 24, our maximum resolution, if we want to use all the 24-bit, would be 144 dB. There's no converter on the market handling 144 dB at their ADDA stage. So you see what I'm going, even the best converters out there, they are about 124, 125 dB. And that if it's true and not just written on specs. And if you're mixing hybrid, you're using hardware inserts, you do not want to go out of your converter into the hardware and back in at a level that your converter cannot handle. That's when it starts to sound really bad. Because even if you're not clipping by your close, remember, at 24-bit, you would be at 144 dB. No converter will handle that. So just lower that from starters. And remember, hardware units are usually calibrated around minus 18 dBSF. So you wanna go into the machine at a sweet spot. Some have a higher sweet spot than others, and you will learn based on what hardware you're using, how hard you wanna hit it, where is the sweet spot. That will require time, but the concept is there's no benefit of going in and out of your converter at too high of a level. So if you're using hardware insert, is a safe bet to go with the minus 18 dB. For me, again, is a bit low. I would shoot for something like minus 10, minus 12, but it also depends on track count. It depends on how many hardware units. I usually mix with something like 30 to 36 hardware channel in and out. So everything, remember, adds up, and that ends up in your 2-bus. And then another very, very common question that I always get on my previous video about gain staging. So why I can't use clip gain to do the gain staging, and I have to use a clip plugin or a trim plugin? Well, as I said before, you can use clip gain. Clip gain is not meant to do that, but you can do it. Well, first of all, it's personal preference and workflow. The way I use clip gain is to adjust macro levels on a full track that has very different levels from section to section, for example. So this means that on a track, I will have different levels for each clip. Gain staging needs to be something steady, done first. And if I use clip gain to do that, I will have different levels from different sections. Again, we go back to the concept of unity. I need to start my mix at unity gain and then use clip gain to adjust macro dynamics section by section and faders to mix, meaning to adjust level to automate the levels during the song. But the gain staging needs to be steady and the first thing that I do. So there's nothing technically wrong in using clip gain to do your gain staging, because clip gain will still come before the insert as opposed to the fader, which comes after your insert. So if your purpose is not to clip the plugin, you have that by using clip gain. It's just you won't be able to then adjust clip gain based on what the mix needs after if you're using it for gain staging. And why would you want to take that tool away just to do gain staging? I think wanting to do gain staging with clip gain is kind of lazy, because you want visual feedback as opposed to actually think about the gain staging and levels. And not only it has no benefits, but now you have all clips at different level when you start the mix. And another misconception before showing something really quick on Pro Tools about recording level, a trick that you can use is the fader resolution. Some people say you don't do gain staging and you don't lower your fader because you lose resolution. Well, if you lower your fader, nothing happens. You don't lose resolution. Don't be afraid to do that. That's not the reason not to do gain staging with faders, okay? The reason is what we said before, not to hit the inserts at a too hot of a level. So I hope this clarifies the gain staging concept for both those who use only samples and loops and mix 100% in the box, as well as for those people that still records and mix hybrid with hardware gear like myself. And I want to leave you with one simple trick for Pro Tools users for when you record. Let's get to it. So this is a trick you can use in Pro Tools to be extra safe when recording, to try to avoid clipping your ADDA stage. It's a specific setting. So we open up our setup menu the preferences in the metering tab. Here we see the default is a 0 dB equals 0 dB SF, which means if I play you this track, which is normalized and peaked at 0, and I leave my fader at 0, here on the peak meter, we see 0 dB, obviously. Okay? Orange, 0 dB. If I push my fader 1 dB higher or even less, we go over. All right? Peak +1, that's bad. But if we set up our metering in the preferences, in the metering tab, let's say at -10 dB SF, we see that our metering, if I put it at -10, will hit 0 dB. Pro Tools is now showing 0 here on the meter with the fader at -10, and nothing changed in the level itself, it's just the metering. And you can see here on the peak, it shows -10, which means we have all this range here from -10 to 0, in which we can use the fader, but we are not clipping. You see, it doesn't go on red until I go over. And then now it shows the red, shows the clipping. So by setting up our metering with a little bit of headroom, we are extra safe when recording and when mixing, that we will never hit clipping, because when we are at -10, the meter will show that we are at 0 already. Okay? I hope this trick was useful. So this is it for this video. I hope it was useful. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave a like. And I really hope it helped you guys to understand the gain staging concept once and for all. But if you have any question, please leave it in the comment down below. Share the video around if you liked it and you thought it was useful. Follow MixbusTv on Facebook and Instagram. We have a lot of news we are announcing on those pages and a lot of great exclusive content. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.